Luther Banks already had the boy's wrist in his hand, not tight enough to hurt, not loose enough to ignore. The toy gun was still pointed at his chest when Luther spoke. You don't point a weapon at someone unless you understand what it can do. His voice was low, steady, not loud, not angry. The boy froze. Then his face crumpled. He started to cry. The sound bounced off white tile and glass storefronts. Sharp, panicked, a woman rushed forward. "What's going on?" she said, breathless. "Why are you holding him?" Phones came up around them. Screens glowing, red lights blinking. Luther released the boy immediately. The child stumbled back into his mother's arms. The toy gun slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor, spinning once before stopping. Luther stood still in the Santa suit. Sweat pressed the fabric against his back. The beard itched. The boots felt heavy. He scared him, the woman said, her voice shaking now. "He didn't mean any harm." Luther nodded once. "I know," he said. "That's why I stopped it early." The crowd murmured. Someone whispered. Someone else kept filming. That was when Preston arrived. He moved quickly, stepping between Luther and the family with practiced ease. "I'm so sorry," Preston said to the woman. "Are you and your son okay?" She nodded, holding the boy tighter. Preston turned then. He took Luther in with one long look. The posture, the way he stood, feet set, hands behind his back without realizing it. Sir Preston said sharply, "This is a children's environment." Luther didn't move. "That was unsafe," Luther said. "I gave him a direct order to lower it." The word landed wrong. Direct order. Preston's eyes narrowed. "This isn't the military," he said. "You don't give orders here." "I understand," Luther replied. "But a weapon, it's a toy," Preston snapped. "And you put your hands on a customer's child." The crowd grew quiet. "You're done," Preston said. "Take off the costume and leave." Luther stayed where he was. "I was hired for the shift," he said. "I did my job." "You terrified a family," Preston said. "You're fired. Right now." Luther adjusted the beard with 2 fingers. "Then I'll need my pay," he said. Preston let out a short, humorless laugh. For what he said. Playing soldier. Luther's hands settled behind his back again before he caught himself. Preston noticed. He tilted his head. "Let me guess," he said. "You served right." Luther didn't answer. "That stance," Preston continued. "That tone. I've seen it before." A murmur moved through the crowd. "You one of those guys," Preston said. "Always talking like you're still in charge." Luther's jaw tightened. "Stolen valor," Preston said flatly. The words dropped hard. Someone in the crowd repeated it under their breath. Stolen valor. Luther went very still. His right hand curled slowly into a fist at his side. Not shaking. Controlled. "You know that's a crime," Preston said. "Pretending to be something you're not." Luther looked down at the toy gun on the floor. Bright plastic. Harmless to everyone except memory. Then he looked back up. His eyes were tired now. Older than they'd looked a moment ago. "You're making a mistake," Luther said quietly. Preston scoffed. "I'm protecting this mall," he said, "from people who bring the wrong kind of energy." He pointed toward the exit. "Take the suit and go." The crowd waited, waiting for Luther to raise his voice, waiting for him to snap. Luther took one slow step back, not retreating, containing himself. "You really don't know who you're talking to," he said. There was no threat in it, only weight, only fatigue. The Christmas music drifted overhead, cheerful and unaware. For a moment, no one spoke. If you've ever been judged by how you looked instead of who you are, this story is for you. 6 hours earlier, the Greyhound station smelled like old coffee and wet coats. It was 6:30 in the morning, the kind of hour where nothing felt settled yet. Luther Banks sat on a metal bench beneath the departure board. He reached into his coat and pulled out his wallet. He opened it slowly. Empty. He checked again. Then a third time. Nothing but an old receipt and a faded photo folded thin with age. Luther closed the wallet and stared at it. Earlier that morning, someone had brushed past him near the ticket counter. A quick bump. An apology that came too fast. He remembered noticing it now too late. Pickpocket. He exhaled through his nose, not angry, just tired. Across the station, taped to a concrete pillar, a piece of paper caught his eye. An obituary. He stood and walked over each step, deliberate. He pulled the paper down carefully, smoothing the creases flat with both hands. Colonel James Mitchell, Arlington National Cemetery. Service 3:00 p.m. Today, Luther's thumb paused over the name. James Mitchell, his commanding officer, the man who had pulled him out of smoke and rubble without asking twice. Luther closed his eyes briefly. "Lord," he whispered, "get me there. Please." It wasn't a long prayer. He'd learned long ago that God didn't need paragraphs. Luther glanced back at the departure board. Last bus tonight. 9:00 p.m., $85. If he missed it, the next one wouldn't leave until late morning tomorrow. Too late. He folded the obituary and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket right over his chest. "I'm coming, sir," he said quietly. The words stayed with him for a second longer than expected. "Leave no man behind." He said it the way he always had. As a rule. As a debt. Near the station entrance, a bright flyer flapped in the draft from the opening doors. Seasonal Santa needed. Cash paid same day. $100. Luther read it once, then again. He looked down at his empty wallet, then back at the obituary. He nodded to himself. "All right," he murmured. 4 hours. 45 minutes later, he sat across from Preston Vane in a mall office that smelled like lemon cleaner and impatience. Preston didn't offer him a seat. Luther took one anyway. His duffel bag rested at his feet. The zipper was broken teeth missing like it had lost a fight. One strap had been repaired with duct tape. Preston noticed it immediately. His eyes lingered there before moving up to Luther's face. "You've done this before?" Preston asked. "I follow instructions," Luther said. "I show up on time." Preston laughed under his breath. "This is Santa," he said. "Not the Marines." Luther didn't react. "I understand," he said. Preston leaned back. "You scare a kid, you forget to smile, you break character," once he said. "You don't get paid." Luther met his eyes. "I won't be a problem." Preston studied him, then waved a hand toward the hall. "Changing rooms down there," he said. "Costumes waiting?" Luther stood, slung the duffel over his shoulder, and left. The changing room was small, no windows. One mirror bolted crookedly to the wall. He locked the door. The duffel came off his shoulder and hit the bench with a dull sound. The zipper stuck halfway open, teeth refusing to line up. Luther stared at it for a moment. He shook his head. "No," he said quietly. He unbuttoned his jacket instead. The dress blues were already underneath. Dark blue, red trim, gold buttons catching the light. He stood there for a long second looking at himself in the mirror. This wasn't something you trusted to a broken bag. He reached into the duffel and took out a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside, the medals rested in careful order. Luther removed them one by one. Silver star, bronze star. Then his fingers stopped. The Purple Heart. He held it longer than the others. The metal was cool against his palm. He remembered the heat, the sound, the blood soaking through fabric that hadn't been thick enough. Mitchell's voice steady in the chaos. "You're still breathing, Banks. That's what matters." Luther swallowed. He placed the Purple Heart into the box, last setting it apart, making sure it lay flat. He closed the box and set it gently on the bench. Then he pulled the Santa suit over the uniform. The weight settled immediately. Thick fabric, no air. He fastened the belt, pulled on the boots, adjusted the sleeves. The beard came last. When he looked in the mirror again, Santa Claus stared back at him. Only the posture didn't belong. Luther rested a hand briefly over his chest, feeling the uniform beneath. "Just 4 hours," he said. "Then I can go." By 11:15, sweat ran down his spine. Luther sat upright in the Santa chair, hands on his knees, eyes flicking up to the clock above the kiosk. 3 hours and 45 minutes left. The velvet box pressed warm against his side under the costume. The music played on, and Luther waited. Luther sat the way he always did when there was nothing to lean on. Back straight, feet planted, hands resting on his knees. The Santa chair creaked under his weight, but he didn't adjust. The suit clung to him, now damp with sweat. Heat pooled under the beard, down his spine, trapped between layers he refused to remove. His shoulders stayed squared. Old habits didn't ask permission. Preston passed behind him and stopped. "Smile," Preston said. "You look like you're under interrogation." Luther lifted the corners of his mouth just enough to comply. "That's not a smile," Preston said. "Kids don't want to see a drill sergeant." Luther nodded once. "I'll work on it." Preston shook his head and walked off. Families drifted past. Most didn't slow down. Parents glanced at Luther, then gently guided their children toward the brighter side of the mall, toward velvet ropes and glowing signs that promised shorter lines and better treatment. Luther watched them go. He'd learned not to take that kind of thing personally. People followed comfort. They always had. A few minutes later, a small group approached from the other direction. No strollers, no shopping bags, jackets a little too thin for the season. They stopped at the edge of the display, unsure if they were allowed to step closer. One boy moved first. He was small for his age. 8, maybe. Hair cut unevenly like someone had done it themselves. His sneakers were worn down at the toes. "Are you real?" the boy asked. Luther leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked. "My dad says magic isn't real," the boy said. "Says it's just stories people tell when they don't have much." Luther considered that for a moment. Then he reached inside the Santa suit, slow and careful, and pulled out a small brass compass. It was old. The metal dulled with age, the glass scratched but still whole, and it was warm. Warm from being carried close to his chest, from resting against the uniform beneath the costume. from staying where Luther kept the things he didn't trust to leave behind. He opened his palm and let the boy see it. Magic, Luther said, is finding your way home when the path isn't marked. The boy leaned closer. That thing still works, it does, Luther said, if you listen. The boy took it gently. The warmth surprised him. He turned it in his hands, watching the needle steady itself. What's your name? Luther asked. Marcus. Luther nodded. Marcus, he said. You ever get lost? Marcus shrugged. All the time, and you make it back. Marcus smiled a little crooked. Most times. Luther's eyes drifted past the mall lights, past the fake snow and plastic trees. I'm still trying, he said. Marcus held the compass out, starting to give it back. Luther closed the boy's fingers around it instead. Keep it, he said. Just for today. Marcus looked up at him, unsure. Really, really. Marcus stuck out his hand. Luther took it. The handshake was serious, careful, like it meant something. Man to man. Then it happened. A sharp pop cracked through the air. Plastic, hollow, but loud. Luther was on his feet before the echo faded. His hand snapped toward his belt. His eyes went distant, empty, focused on something that wasn't there. For half a second, the mall disappeared. Marcus took a step back. Mister, he asked. Are you okay? Luther blinked. Once. Twice. The mall rushed back in. Sound, color, noise. He looked at his hand, still half raised. Then at Marcus. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't mean to scare you. Marcus nodded, still holding the compass tightly. Before Luther could sit again, footsteps came running. Fast, heavy. A boy burst into view, moving too quick for the space. Designer jacket, new sneakers, confidence that came from never being told no. In his hands was a toy gun. Black, heavy, too realistic. He skidded to a stop right in front of Luther and raised it. Bang, the boy shouted. Die, old man. The barrel hovered inches from Luther's face. Everything went quiet again. Luther didn't move. His chest rose once, slow, controlled. He looked at the gun, then at the boy's finger on the trigger. The moment stretched, and somewhere deep inside him, something old began to stir. The boy didn't hesitate. He raised the toy gun, higher arm locked straight, finger tight on the trigger. Bang! The sound cracked through the air. Luther moved before thought caught up. His left hand swept the barrel aside in one clean motion. His right hand closed around the boy's wrist. Not crushing, not gentle, certain. The plastic gun hit the floor and skidded away. Luther leaned in just enough for the boy to hear him. You don't point a weapon at someone unless you understand what it can do, he said. His voice was low, even, not angry, not loud. The boy froze. His eyes widened, confusion giving way to fear. Then he screamed. Mom! The sound was sharp and unfiltered. The woman rushed in immediately, pulling the boy back into her arms, as if he'd been pulled from a fire. He attacked my child, she screamed. He grabbed him. Luther released the wrist at once and stepped back. Both hands came up open. I didn't hurt him, Luther said. I stopped it before. Don't you talk to me, the woman shouted. Look at him, he's shaking. The boy clung to her, sobbing now. Around them, phones rose higher, screens angled closer, red lights blinking. Marcus stood frozen near the chair, the brass compass clenched in his fist. His eyes searched Luther's face, confused, afraid. Luther caught his glance and gave him a small nod. It's all right. But the mall didn't hear that. Preston came running, breath quick, tie slightly off-center. What happened? He demanded, already placing himself between the woman and Luther. She pointed at Luther. That man grabbed my son, she said. He terrified him. Preston turned sharply. What the hell were you thinking? He snapped. He was pointing a gun, Luther said calmly. Real or not, you don't let that stand. Enough, Preston cut in. He turned back to the woman instantly, voice softening, posture lowering. I am so sorry, Preston said. This is absolutely unacceptable. He glanced toward a nearby employee. Call security. Luther's jaw tightened. I was hired to keep kids safe, he said. That includes teaching them when something. This is a shopping mall. Preston snapped, turning back. Not a combat zone. He stepped closer now, voice low and sharp. You do not touch VIP customers' children, Preston said. Ever. The word VIP landed with weight. Luther's eyes flicked briefly toward the velvet rope nearby. The private photo area. The shorter line. The promise of better treatment. I didn't use force, Luther said. I redirected the weapon. Stop talking, Preston barked. You're digging yourself deeper. The woman rocked the boy back and forth. He was just playing, she said, tears streaking her face. He didn't mean anything. I know, Luther said. That's why I intervened early. Stop, Preston shouted. Heads turned. The space felt tighter now. Smaller. You are done, Preston said. Take off the suit. You're fired. Right now. The words echoed. For a moment, Luther didn't answer. Something passed through his eyes. Not rage, distance, the look that came when two worlds collided, and only one could be honored. The 1,000-yard stare. For half a second, the mall fell away. Another sound. Another corridor. Another moment where hesitation meant a name on a wall. Then he blinked. He was back. Luther exhaled slowly. I didn't break any rule that keeps people alive, he said. The words were quiet, heavy, final. Preston scoffed. You don't get to decide that, he said. I do. Security hovered closer now, uncertain, hands near radios, eyes darting. Marcus took a small step back, still gripping the compass. Luther noticed. He forced his shoulders to relax. I'm not a threat, Luther said. I'm trying to prevent one. Preston pointed toward the exit. You're a liability, he said, and I don't keep liabilities around. Phones stayed trained on Luther. Waiting for him to argue, waiting for him to break. Luther looked down at the toy gun on the floor, then at the boy's trembling hands, then at Marcus. Something settled in his chest. He could leave, walk out, disappear. But the clock was still ticking. He met Preston's eyes. Then pay me, Luther said, and I'll go. Preston smiled thinly. After this, he said, you should be grateful I don't call the police. The crowd leaned in, and Luther felt the edge of the moment sharpen. The place where restraint would be mistaken for guilt. The place just before dignity was tested, and beneath the Santa suit, beneath the heat and noise, the uniform waited. Unseen, unyielding. Preston didn't hesitate after Luther spoke. He straightened his jacket and turned to the crowd instead of facing Luther. Do you hear this? Preston said, loud enough for everyone. This man thinks rules don't apply to him. He shook his head slowly, like he was disappointed. I've seen this before, he went on. Men who stand stiff, talk careful, act like authority. His eyes flicked back to Luther. Then, when things go wrong, they start spinning stories. A few people in the crowd shifted. Some looked away. Others leaned in closer. "You tell people you served," Preston said. "You talk like you're trained, like you're better than everyone else here." Luther didn't answer. Preston lowered his voice, letting it carry. "That's called stolen valor," he said, pretending to be a veteran. The word spread fast. "Stolen valor, that's a felony." He could go to prison. Luther felt his jaw lock. His fists tightened at his sides, trembling just enough to show the effort it took to keep them still. Not fear. Anger held back by years of discipline. "I never claimed anything," Luther said quietly. Preston laughed. "Oh, come on," he said. "The posture, the commands, the way you look at people." He gestured at Luther's chest. "Who do you think you're fooling?" Then he turned sharply towards security. "Search his bag," Preston said. "Let's see what else he's hiding." The guard hesitated. "Sir." "Unless you want to explain why you protected a criminal," Preston snapped. The guard swallowed and stepped forward. Luther didn't resist. He stood straight, eyes forward. The way he had stood when being searched mattered for survival. The zipper on the duffel stuck. Teeth scraped. One snapped loose. The bag tipped. Its contents spilled onto the polished floor. A toothbrush rolled away. Worn socks fell open. A folded shirt slid flat. Someone whispered, "He's homeless." Another voice murmured, "Figures." Luther kept his gaze fixed ahead. Then the velvet box came out. It slid across the floor, turning once, and stopped directly in front of Preston's shoe. The mall went quiet. Preston looked down. He nudged the box with the toe of his shoe. "What's this?" he said. "Stolen jewelry, the sole pressed down, lightly grinding dust into the velvet." Luther's body went rigid. "Take your foot off that," he said. Each word was slow. "Separated." Preston smiled, or what he asked. "You going to give another order?" Luther stepped forward. Not fast, not aggressive, but enough that Preston felt it. "Leave no man behind," Luther said. "You do not get to disrespect him." The air changed. Preston took a step back before he caught himself. Luther bent down. He picked up the velvet box with both hands, careful, deliberate. He held it close to his chest. Then, with his thumb, he gently wiped away the streak of dirt left by Preston's shoe. Once. Then again. Only when it was clean did he stop. The crowd watched in complete silence. Phones still recording. No one speaking now. Luther's lips moved, barely visible beneath the beard. Not loud enough to hear. A prayer his grandmother had taught him when he was 8 years old. "Grant me strength. Grant me peace. Help me do right." He opened his eyes. When he looked up, his eyes were steady. "You have no idea who you're talking to," he said. There was no threat in his voice. Only history. Only weight. Preston cleared his throat. "Get him out of here," he said too quickly. "Before this escalates." Security didn't move right away. No one did. Luther stood there holding the box against his heart. Around him, the crowd shifted uncomfortably, unsure now who they were supposed to believe. And beneath the red suit, beneath the sweat and humiliation, something patient waited. Something that had endured far worse than public judgment. The silence stretched. No one apologized. No one stepped forward. And the moment of truth was almost here. If you've ever witnessed someone being judged unfairly because of how they looked, comment your story below. Share this video to remind people never judge a book by its cover. Luther lowered himself to one knee. He did it slowly, not because his body demanded it, but because the moment did. The mall had gone quiet in a way that made every small sound feel exposed. The soft scrape of his boot against the tile carried farther than it should have. He set the velvet box down with both hands, easing it onto the floor the way a man might place a sleeping child into a crib. Careful, protective, final. He straightened and looked at Preston. "You want to know who I am?" Luther asked. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Preston scoffed, reaching for control. "I know exactly who you are," Preston said. "A con artist, a liar, a man who no," Luther said. "One word. Flat. Certain. You don't." Luther reached up and hooked his fingers beneath the edge of the Santa suit. For a brief second, the crowd didn't understand what was happening. Phones shifted. Someone leaned forward. A confused murmur rippled through the onlookers. Then Luther pulled. The sound tore through the space. Velcro ripping free. Long, rough, final. The red suit slid off his shoulders and collapsed onto the floor, lifeless and empty. The beard followed, landing beside it. What stood beneath was not a costume. Dark blue replaced red. Not festive blue. Not decorative. Marine Corps blue. The USMC dress blues were immaculate. Sharp creases. Red piping, clean and exact. Gold buttons caught the overhead lights and reflected them back without apology. The mall froze. A breath was held. Then another. Luther bent down again and opened the velvet box. Inside was not a handful of loose metals. It was a single mounting bar. A unified rack aligned and assembled long before this moment. Silver Star. Bronze Star. Navy Commendation. Combat Action Ribbon. The Purple Heart set into the line where it belonged. Complete. Luther did not look at the crowd. He did not look at Preston. He took the mounting bar in one motion and brought it to his chest. The action was quick, efficient, muscle memory. Click. The sound was small, but it carried. The uniform was complete now. Only after the bar was secured did Luther's hand pause. His fingers moved across the line of ribbons, once automatically checking alignment. They stopped briefly at the Purple Heart. Just for a second. Not for the crowd. Not for recognition. For memory. Then his hand dropped back to his side. The man standing there was no longer Santa Claus. He was a United States Marine. Silence deepened, heavy and reverent. From the back of the crowd movement, a man in a dark suit stepped forward. Gray hair, weathered face. A posture that civilian clothes could not erase. His eyes locked onto Luther's shoulders, then dropped to the rank insignia. He froze. The bags in his hands slipped free and hit the floor. He didn't notice. He came to attention, heels together, spine straight, and snapped into a perfect salute. "Colonel Banks," he said. The mall stopped breathing. Preston's face drained of color. Luther returned the salute instantly, his movement precise and automatic. "Captain Rodriguez," Luther said. "It's been a long time." Rodriguez's voice wavered. "I didn't know you were here, sir," he said. "If I had known..." I should have recognized you. You didn't do anything wrong, Luther said. Rodriguez swallowed hard and turned toward Preston. The warmth left his face. You just humiliated a United States Marine Corps colonel, Rodriguez said. A man who saved my life in Fallujah. Preston took a step back, words failing him. Rodriguez continued, voice steady and cold. I'm the vice president of the County Veterans Association, he said. And you accused a decorated combat officer of stolen valor. He let the silence do its work. You didn't insult a costume, Rodriguez said. You insulted a legend. For a moment, no one moved. Then a single clap echoed. Then another. The applause spread slow at first, then building. Phones lowered. People stood straighter. Some wiped at their eyes, others simply watched in stunned silence. Luther did not look at Preston. He bent down, picked up the red Santa suit and folded it neatly. Once. Then again. He placed it carefully on the chair, smoothing it flat. Only then did he turn back. Dignity isn't what a man wears, Luther said. It's how he treats people. The applause grew louder, and Preston stood alone. The applause did not last long. It faded the way applause always does, unevenly, leaving behind an awkward silence where no one was quite sure what came next. Rodriguez lowered his hand and turned back toward Preston. His voice was calm now, even, almost instructional. Do you actually know what the Stolen Valor Act says? Rodriguez asked. Preston swallowed hard. It exists to protect people who served, Rodriguez continued, not to give managers a weapon when they feel embarrassed or challenged. Preston shook his head quickly. I didn't know who he was, he said. If I had known you didn't ask, Luther said. The words cut cleanly through the space. He wasn't angry. He wasn't raised in volume. You looked, Luther said. And you decided. Preston opened his mouth, then closed it again. Rodriguez pulled his phone from his pocket. I'm calling the mall owner, he said. He's a friend of mine. He'll want to hear this himself. Preston's face tightened. Please, he said. Just give me a moment. Let me explain. There is no moment, Rodriguez replied. He turned slightly away and placed the call. The crowd stood frozen in a loose circle now. No one filmed anymore. No one whispered. Even the security guards remained still unsure of where authority now rested. Luther stood quietly, hands at his sides. Dress blues complete. He did not look at Preston. 5 minutes passed. They felt longer. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the mall, sharp and deliberate. A man in his early 60s approached, flanked by an assistant. Tailored suit, polished shoes, the kind of presence that bent a room without a word being spoken. Rodriguez ended the call and stepped forward. Mr. Harris, he said, thank you for coming. Harris nodded, once eyes already taking in the scene. What's going on? Harris asked. Rodriguez explained. No dramatics, no exaggeration, just facts delivered clean and precise. Harris listened without interrupting. Then his gaze settled on Luther. The uniform, the ribbons, the bearing, recognition flickered. Harris turned slowly toward Preston. Is any of this untrue? Harris asked. Preston's voice cracked. I was just doing my job, he said. I didn't know that's enough, Harris said. His tone was flat, decisive. You're terminated, Harris said. Effective immediately. Preston stared at him. "You can't leave," Harris said, "before I involve my legal counsel for defamation." Preston looked around, desperate now. No one met his eyes. Security stepped in and guided him toward the exit. As they walked him past, Preston's gaze fell on the folded Santa suit still resting on the chair. Red fabric, cheap polyester, lifeless. Beneath it, for just a moment, he'd seen something he should have recognized. His father's uniform hung in a frame at home. Same posture, same bearing. Preston had forgotten to look for it. His footsteps dragged against the tile as the crowd parted in silence. No one applauded this time. A small movement caught Luther's attention. Marcus stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, the brass compass still clutched in his hand. He walked carefully, like he was approaching something important. He stopped in front of Luther and held out the compass. "I think you need this more than me," Marcus said quietly. Luther looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No," Luther said. "I already found my way today." He closed Marcus's fingers gently around the compass. "You keep it," Luther said. "And when you get lost, you'll know which way is home." Marcus nodded slowly, then surprised Luther by stepping forward and wrapping his arms around him in a quick, fierce hug. Luther's hand came up, resting briefly on the boy's shoulder. Marcus stepped back, clutching the compass to his chest, and disappeared back into the crowd. Harris turned back to Luther. He inclined his head slightly. Colonel Harris said, "On behalf of Chestnut Grove Mall, I offer you my sincere apology." He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. $500, Harris said. "Not wages. Respect." Luther accepted the envelope. He did not open it. He slipped it carefully into the inside pocket of his jacket over his chest, into the same place where the folded obituary already rested. The means and the mission. "I only need 85, Luther said quietly. "I have a bus to catch. Arlington." Harris hesitated, then shook his head. "Keep it," he said, "and let me arrange a private ride." Rodriguez stepped forward immediately. "I'll drive," he said. "It would be my honor, sir." Luther looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. Across the floor, the woman the boy's mother stood apart now. Her face flushed, eyes lowered. She stepped forward hesitantly. "I didn't know," she said. "I truly didn't." Luther looked past her to the boy half hidden behind her coat. He lowered himself slightly so they were eye to eye. "Did you learn something today?" Luther asked. The boy nodded. "Don't point a gun at people," he said, "even if it's fake." Luther nodded once. "That's right," he said. He stood and looked back at the woman. "That's all I wanted," he said. "Nothing more." The mall slowly resumed its rhythm. Music drifted back in softer now. Shoppers moved again, quieter, more aware. Luther adjusted his jacket. Time pressed forward again. Rodriguez gestured toward the exit. "We should go," he said. "Traffic won't wait." Luther took one last look at the place. Then he walked. And this time no one stopped him. The car eased away from the mall without urgency. Luther sat at the back seat, shoulders resting against the leather hands placed loosely on his thighs. Rodriguez drove in silence, one hand steady on the wheel, the other relaxed, as if he understood that nothing needed to be said yet. Outside the window, the world looked quieter. Snow clung to the edges of the road in uneven lines, thin but persistent. Sunlight broke through gaps in the clouds, pale and low, catching on windshields and bare branches, turning everything softer than it had been an hour ago. Luther watched it pass. For the first time that day, his breathing slowed without effort. He reached up and unfastened the top button of his jacket, then the next. The fabric loosened slightly around his chest. With one deliberate motion, he unpinned the entire ribbon rack from his dress blues. The movement was clean, practiced. He held the rack for a moment, then placed it carefully into the velvet box on his lap. He adjusted it once to make sure it lay flat, then closed the lid partway, leaving it resting there. The ritual steadied him. Rodriguez glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You still remember Fallujah?" he asked. Luther kept his eyes on the passing landscape. "Every day," he said. Rodriguez nodded, eyes returning to the road. "There were 6 of us pinned down that afternoon," he said. The radio was gone. The street was on fire. His voice dropped slightly. "I was hit. Leg shattered. Couldn't move." Rodriguez paused. "You ran across 40 meters of open street. Twice. Once for me, once for Jenkins." Rodriguez's hands tightened at the wheel. "Jenkins didn't make it," he said quietly. "But you carried him anyway, all the way back." Luther's jaw tightened. "You went back when you didn't have to," Rodriguez continued. "You carried 2 men yourself. You came back for the others." Luther's gaze didn't shift. "I did what needed doing," he said. "Jenkins had a daughter," Rodriguez said. "She got to bury her father because of you. That's not what needed doing. That's who you are." Luther said nothing, but his hand moved briefly to his chest where the uniform had been. Rodriguez shook his head faintly. "Not everyone does," he said, "even when they know the cost." They drove on in silence. The engine hummed steadily. Tires whispered against damp pavement. Snow crunched softly at intersections where plows hadn't reached. Luther opened the velvet box again. This time he didn't reach for the rack. He reached instead for the Purple Heart. Unclipping it from the mounting bar took a moment longer, his fingers working carefully, deliberately. He lifted it free and held it alone in his palm. It felt heavier this way. Sunlight slipped through the window and struck its edge, throwing a brief flare of light across the back seat. "Mitchell gave me this," Luther said. 2004. Rodriguez listened. He said, "Banks' blood doesn't mean you're weak." Luther continued. "It means you're still in the fight." Rodriguez let out a quiet breath. "He was a good man," he said. Luther nodded once. He was the best. He held the Purple Heart a moment longer, then returned it to its place on the rack. The clip clicked softly as it settled back where it belonged. Only then did he close the box. The road opened up ahead of them, long and pale beneath the winter sky. Luther reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked near one corner. The battery icon blinked low. He unlocked it and scrolled slowly. Names passed by. Then one stopped him. Sarah, daughter. Below it, a text notification from 2 years ago. Emily was born today. 6 LBS 3 O's. Wish you were here. He hadn't replied. hadn't called, hadn't known what to say. His thumb hovered over her name now. It trembled just slightly. 3 years since the last call. Now there was a granddaughter he'd never met. 3 years since he had let it ring too long and told himself he would try again tomorrow. Tomorrow had a way of slipping past him. Rodriguez noticed the stillness in the mirror. "You want to pull over?" he asked. "Make the call." Luther shook his head. "Not like this," he said. "Not over the phone." Rodriguez nodded and said nothing more. They drove on. A green highway sign appeared ahead. Arlington, 45 miles. Luther read it twice. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and rested the velvet box squarely on his lap. His hands settled on either side of it, steady grounding. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, to prepare. Images surfaced, voices, orders, long silences between noise. Mitchell's laugh, Mitchell's stillness, and beneath it all a smaller voice he had ignored for too long. Rodriguez eased into the next lane. "We'll be there on time," he said. Luther opened his eyes and nodded. "I know," he said. Outside, snow continued to fall lightly, covering the world without asking permission. And the road carried them forward. Arlington National Cemetery was quiet, in a way that didn't ask for silence, it demanded it. Rows of white headstones stretched across the hill, clean and precise, each one aligned, as if still under orders. The sky hung low and gray, the light flat and honest. About 40, maybe 50 people stood gathered near the service canopy, coats, buttoned hands, folded breath visible in the cold. Luther walked up the path alone. His dress blues were complete. Jacket closed, ribbons aligned, shoes polished. He moved with the same measured pace he had learned decades earlier, each step deliberate, respectful of the ground beneath him. A few faces turned. Someone near the front recognized him and gave a small nod. Another did the same. No words, no questions. Just acknowledgement. Luther took his place at the back of the gathering and stood at attention. He did not move again. The ceremony began. The chaplain's voice carried softly, steady against the open air, words about service, about duty, about a life measured not by comfort, but by commitment. Luther listened without lowering his eyes. When the firing detail raised their rifles, the sound cut through the stillness. One shot, then another, 21 in total. Each report echoed across the cemetery and into Luther's chest, landing there with familiar weight. He did not flinch. He did not blink. When it was over, the silence that followed felt heavier than the sound itself. The flag detail stepped forward. The flag was folded carefully, precisely, each movement exact, practiced, reverent. When it was complete, the folded triangle was carried to the widow and placed into her hands. She nodded, holding it close. The crowd stood quietly as the final words were spoken. Then slowly people began to shift. Hands were shaken, shoulders were touched, voices stayed low. Luther remained where he was. That was when a man in his 40s wearing a dark suit approached him. He stopped a few feet away. "Colonel Banks," the man said. Luther turned and faced him. "Yes." The man extended his hand. "My father spoke about you often," he said. "James Mitchell. He said you were his best officer." Luther accepted the handshake. He was my teacher, Luther said, and my friend. The man nodded. He left something for you, he said, reaching into his coat pocket. He told me to give it to you if you came. He handed Luther a plain envelope. Luther took it with both hands. He stepped aside out of the path of the others and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. Luther recognized the handwriting immediately. He read, "Banks, if you're reading this, it means I've finally made it home. You did your duty more than once. But there's one more mission I never got to give you in person. Don't let the war take your family. Leave no man behind, especially yourself. Go home, Banks. That's my final order." Luther folded the letter slowly. His hand trembled just slightly as he pressed the crease flat. He lifted his eyes to the sky. Snow had begun to fall, light, almost hesitant. Small flakes drifted down and settled on shoulders, on grass, on stone. "Yes, Sir," Luther whispered. "I copy." The crowd thinned. People drifted away in small groups. Footsteps soft against the path. Eventually, only a few figures remained at a distance. Luther walked forward to the place where a temporary marker stood. He knelt. The cold pressed through the fabric of his trousers, but he didn't shift. He opened the velvet box. Inside, the mounting bar rested intact. He unclipped the Purple Heart and held it for a moment in his palm. Then he placed it gently at the base of the marker. "You gave this to me," Luther said quietly. "Now I'm giving it back." He paused. Mission accomplished. He stood, brought his hand up in a final salute. He held it longer than regulation, long enough to say everything he hadn't said out loud. Then he lowered his hand, turned away. He wiped his eyes once quickly with the back of his glove. A few yards away, Rodriguez leaned against the car, keeping a respectful distance so his commanding officer could have a moment alone. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Snow continued to fall softly, settling over the Purple Heart, over the marker, over the ground. Luther took one last look. Then he walked back toward the car. The order had been given, and this time he intended to follow it. The road away from Arlington was quieter than the road in. Rodriguez drove with both hands on the wheel, steady and unhurried. The sky was already beginning to dim, the afternoon light thinning into something softer, more forgiving. Snow drifted down again, light and patient, tapping gently against the windshield. Luther sat in the back seat. He didn't speak. He opened the velvet box on his lap. Inside, the ribbon rack rested neatly, lighter now. The Purple Heart was gone. The empty space where it had been felt intentional, not wrong. The other medals caught the fading light, their edges duller without ceremony around them. He studied them for a long moment. Then he closed the box. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. The screen lit up, cracked, but functional. His thumb moved almost on its own, scrolling to a name he had avoided for too long. Sarah. Daughter. He stared at it. The letters didn't change. They never had. Rodriguez noticed in the mirror. "You want me to find a place?" he asked gently. Somewhere quiet, Luther nodded once. "Yes." They pulled into a small, nearly empty parking lot just off the road. A closed community center. A single light pole humming faintly. Snow collected in the corners where tires never touched. Rodriguez parked and turned off the engine. "I'll be right over there," he said, stepping out. "Take your time, sir." The door closed softly. Luther was alone. He held the phone with both hands now. His fingers trembled just enough to notice. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "If you're listening," he said quietly, "I could use some help with this." It wasn't a perfect prayer, but it was honest, and that had to be enough. Then he pressed call. It rang. Once. Twice. "Dad." The word landed carefully, like it wasn't sure it belonged. "Sarah," Luther said. His voice caught just slightly. It's me. Are you okay?" There was a pause. "I'm okay," she said. "Where are you?" "I just left Arlington," Luther said. "Colonel Mitchell's funeral." Another pause. "I saw the obituary," Sarah said. Her voice softened. "I know he mattered to you. He did," Luther said. "He taught me a lot." He swallowed. "How to lead," he continued. "How to respect the uniform, a beat. But I never learned how to come home," he said. "Not really." Silence filled the line. Luther could hear her breathing. "Dad," Sarah said quietly. "Mitchell left me a letter," Luther said. "He told me not to let the war take my family." His voice lowered heavier now. "I let the war stand between us for too long," he said. "And the silence these past 3 years. That part is on me." Another silence. "Dad," she said again. "What are you trying to say?" Luther's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm asking," he said slowly, choosing each word, "if I can come see you. And the kids." He forced himself to keep going. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just want to try." The silence stretched longer this time. Luther stared at the dashboard, at the thin crack in the vinyl, at the reflection of falling snow. "When would you want to come?" Sarah asked. "This week," Luther said. "If that's too soon." "No," she said quickly, then corrected herself. "Saturday, dinner. 6." Luther closed his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "The kids ask about you." Sarah continued. "Emily just turned 7. She's never met you." The words hit harder than anything else that day. "I know," Luther said. "And I'm sorry." Another pause. "But Dad," Sarah said, "if you come and then disappear again?" "I won't," Luther said immediately. "Not this time, I promise." Her breath caught. "Okay," she said. "I trust you." Then softer. "I miss you, Dad." Luther's voice broke. "I miss you too," he said. "Every day." The call ended. He lowered the phone and rested it on his knee. His eyes burned, but he didn't cry. Rodriguez returned to the car and sat behind the wheel. "Everything all right?" he asked. Luther looked up. For the first time that day, he smiled. "It will be," he said. Finally. The car pulled back onto the road. Snow continued to fall, coating the world outside in quiet white. Luther rested his hand over his chest, over the place where the medals had been. "Mission accomplished, sir," he whispered. "Leave no man behind. Not on the battlefield. Not at home." A sign passed by the window. "Welcome home." The road stretched on, and the car grew smaller against the falling snow. The hardest battle isn't always on the field. Sometimes it's finding the courage to come home. Share this story to honor the silent battles our veterans fight every day. Let's remind the world dignity is earned and no one should be left behind.